we're live.
Hello, welcome to Endgame. This week's topic is energy technologies of the future. Today's guests are Psych Popopo and Atomic Carl.
Yay!
Awesome.
Thanks, Quill.
Thank you. Thank you, Quill Clock. Yes,
Awesome.
welcome to Endgame. This is a talk show about the future of humanity, where we discuss various topics relating to where humanity is headed. So tonight our guest is Atomic Carl, or Karl Alex Pauls, who has some interest in the topic of energy and basically how we produce it and how our civilization handles it and all sorts of different things like that. So to get started, why don't we get a bit of an introduction on you and kind of your background on this topic and your interest in it. And
Great. Well, hi everyone. I'm a senior software engineer in the games industry, but more importantly for this topic, I grew up outside of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My family is in the energy industry. My wife's family is in the chemical engineering part of the energy industry, and so I have a pretty firm background both in my associations and in my science background and my discussions. I of course grew up in East Tennessee, so I understood the problem of acid rain. I understood the problems of global warming. Al Gore was my senator. I was very enthusiastic about it and got a little bit of nihilism, of course, over the early 2000s. And then I had a daughter, and she's 5 now. And so I started sort of really thinking hard about, what are our climate solutions? And I stumbled across the fantastic Thorium Remix video and got very much into the thorium community, but then that made me challenge all of my assumptions on nuclear energy, and so I have really gone into the science and looked to all the different solutions for climate and energy, and I think we've got a really compelling case. And of course, I'm not going to just tell you that nuclear is the only way. That would be contrary to our scientific consensus, and so yeah, I think I'm ready.
But that's sort of the one that you're kind of a proponent for, or at least think like kind of deserves some activism right now.
As one possible solution, kind of thing.
It is the solution that, in my mind, requires the most activism at this point.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, I'm excited to get into that. I kind of want to, this isn't actually a topic I'm very informed about. Sorry to say, it's not something I'm super familiar with, and so I'm interested in having you set the stage of like kind of where we are as a society in terms of our energy production and what the different variables are. Unless you have any questions first, Psych.
Well, I actually, for one, I see Pika has a quick question, and then also, how many people here are just a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you're familiar with nuclear energy? Because really, beyond the concept, I'm not really that familiar with it. So, I mean, I guess that's a kind of, but I feel like I'm not that familiar with it. But I'm just curious if people like know a lot about it. Or... Okay, so it seems like people have a pretty good familiarity.
People are informed.
I'm only familiar with uranium reactors. So what is exactly thorium?
Yeah, I didn't know what thorium was either.
Just to get started there, thorium is a fertile isotope where if you add one additional neutron, it becomes, a non-fissionable element, but then over the course of a month, it breaks down into U-233, which is fissionable. And so
I don't really understand. So I kind of failed chemistry. So for a layperson,
that's uranium, right? It breaks down into uranium.
If it breaks down in a month, how do you get it then?
Well, you add a neutron. So you have a piece of thorium, and if you add a neutron to that, for instance, from a nuclear reaction, that makes it breedable as a fuel.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think So I think we're going to get into more of the chemistry a little bit later, right? Like you have some stuff about thorium in the slides.
And I guess that is a question I have. Like, what is nuclear? I don't like just as a broad definition. Can we just define like what nuclear power is?
Right. Okay, so this is great because I just spoke about this at the Pacific Science Center. I was interacting with the public, and nuclear energy is the energy contained within the binding force of the atom. And so if you, for instance, have a piece of uranium, the atoms in that uranium are in a very careful balance where the strong and the weak forces are tightly opposed. And if you add another neutron to that uranium atom, U-233, U-235, it goes out of balance and splits into two atoms that their subatomic particles add up exactly to what you put into it, right? So you're thinking E equals mc squared. That means you didn't get any energy. Well, not quite, because there's actual mass in that binding energy. So that fission is the loss of less than a subatomic particle, and it still creates a fantastic amount of energy. That's 1,000,000 times more energy dense than any fossil fuel, and that's using today's technology.
So
I have...
pardon
me. I had a question about thorium. When you had that extra atom in there, or it has it comes with 233, right? U233, and that's a dangerous gamma emitter, correct? It emits a lot of gamma.
233 is let's see. I'd have to look up its half-life in order to sort of give you a guess at the amount of emissive energy it has. In general, uranium is fairly benign. Gamma, of course, is a very penetrative emission, but the variation in how much damage it causes to our bodies relates to its emissive force, or its emissive energy, I should say. So it's the higher MeV that is produced by something like uranium or radon, as well as whether it's an alpha, beta, or gamma, determines the actual damage it does to people. And not only that, but the biological half-life, which I'd like to get to at around 7:30 when we talk about nuclear accidents.
Okay, so just on the to cover the really quick basics, let me see if my understanding is correct. So generally, atoms are made of a collection of protons and neutrons, and different types of different elements have different combinations, and either combining these or adding new protons or adding new neutrons, or removing some. So putting them together or splitting them apart can release energy, and this energy could be used to fuel or to generate electricity or things like that.
That's exactly right. And in general, if it is an atom that is lighter than iron, a fusion event will create energy. And if it is heavier than iron, a fission event will create energy. However, it's extremely difficult to fuse anything that's heavier than helium or maybe lithium. I forget there's a very difficult kind of fusion that's very efficient. I think that involves lithium. And then there's anything that is lighter than great. Well, no, that's deuterium, tritium. That's still helium. But it's anyway. I'd have to double check on that. But anything lighter than uranium is difficult to fission.
Okay. So that all being established, so we should talk about kind of where the world is in terms of where we get our energy and how that process is going. Do you want me to pull the slides?
Yes, absolutely. The slides are excellent for that.
Okay. Cool. All right. And then I've got the remote control. You'll just have to tell me when to go to the next slide.
Okay. So this is called a Sankey diagram, and it basically shows the flows of energy of like from transportation up at the top, electricity, other fuel, industry, land use, and agriculture, and the intermediate products here in the end use or slash activity, and then what the gas emissions for each of those are. So this is the name of the diagram, again, is a Sankey diagram, and you'll see here at the bottom, this is the World Resources Institute, and you can just find the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas Sankey, Sankey diagram to sort of review that in greater detail. But this is how we get the...
So for those of you who can't see too clearly, these are different types of... So close, yeah, come closer, and then this is like electricity and heat,
but not too close,
land use, agriculture, and then this is the output. So like this big orange or this big brown arrow is carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide.
Yeah.
Our VR headsets makes reading text a little difficult.
I wanted to get you the shape of the data, and we can definitely study it afterwards, because there's a lot of data out there. Go ahead to the next slide. Coal. Coal produces NOx and sulfur dioxide. So this is a diagram of what those gases do in our atmosphere, primarily carbon dioxide, but methane has a very potent and immediate effect on greenhouse, thermal forcing is what it's called, or greenhouse gas for the popular term. And that fortunately goes away very rapidly, but it kind of makes this really complex math problem where we have to decide how much methane versus how much carbon dioxide really matters. And you'll see there's these numbers like that 342 underneath the sun and the -2 under it. That's this diagram has been updated, and since the original publication, our solar energy coming into the Earth has decreased slightly.
Oh.
And that is one of the causes of what we call stratospheric cooling. And I'm sure that if you review the Endgame video on climate change, you might have gone into that. That's one of those little factoids that climate skeptics like to bring up, is that stratospheric cooling and the solar minimum. But the picture is much... Increased. Yeah, the picture is much bigger than that. The reflection decreased, and that's largely to the Arctic. Snow is disappearing in the Arctic, so the majority of the year there's less surface covered by snow.
That's good.
Okay,
Good, and let's go next. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to tell you a story about the Paris Climate Agreement, or the Paris Accord, and basically it's called COP21 was the meeting, and we asked them, okay, so what can we do to keep the Earth from warming past 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average? And that, I think, is around 16 or 17 degrees is that end target global average temperature. And the International Panel on Climate Change came out with this report in October of 2018 called the Special Report on 1.5 degrees. And this is my visualization of the data shown in the summary for policymakers. And it is the CO2 emissions starting at 2010 and ending here on the very right in 2022, and that black line is what our actual emission changes were.
What are these other lines?
The other lines, I'm blocking some of those. We have P1 for pathway 1, that's the green. The blue is pathway 2, orange is pathway 3, and red is pathway 4. And that gray section, that is the average area, or what they call the interquartile. That's the difference between plus 25 and minus 25 of the average for.
What's a pathway?
So the interquartiles is about the academic studies. So there's dozens of academic studies that create these pathway suggestions. The pathways are they illustrate common factors that the IPCC saw in all these academic studies. So the academic studies, again, in gray, and then each pathway is like a characterization of a strategy that you could take to reduce your carbon emissions. And those strategies are about energy, how we use land, and how our economies are shaped.
Okay, so this green pathway here, this would be if we did some like super radical changes and like change stuff up, and then it would really decrease the amount of CO2?
Yeah, the green pathway is minimum energy increases, a very large reduction in our industrial output. And this is the only pathway, in fact, that doesn't feature very much carbon sequestration, which is when you take carbon dioxide out of our emissions or out of our atmosphere and put it into the ground.
Manually kind of thing, or human-made kind of things.
Yeah, it's like a chemical process usually, so that it actually gets fixed in a chemical combination and goes into the rocks.
Okay.
Like the opposite of fracking.
Pretty much. So this is how we're doing. This is our status, basically, of renewable energy production. And you see that the black line there, and that ends around 2015 or 2016. That's when the reliable data for this is available. That's just above pathway 4. And as you saw in the carbon slide, pathway 4 is kind of the bad news. Yeah, it's kind of the bad news path. It's like just holding the gate or holding back the floodgates of carbon dioxide, and so we're doing all right, but we could do a lot better.
And okay, so remind me.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, what is this? Is in this gray area is what's been studied as realistic, or wait, what does that mean?
The gray area. So there are very, very detailed proposals for specific, ultra-specific strategies for how to change our energy use and economies. And that's the gray area is like the average of all those studies.
And the blue is just, it hasn't even been proposed? Like there's no realistic model yet for how to
the IPCC thinks that it is realistic if we follow one of their pathway ideas. And the blue line is a high technology, medium energy consumption. And so if we go to the next slide, it's sort of illustrative of some of the differences of these.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is our nuclear energy production. And you'll notice that green pathway has the least. And the red pathway, for some reason the red pathway has the most. But that might be due to the fact that we overshoot our carbon budget by so much in the near term. But the sad fact for me is that we're not meeting, by a very, very large margin, we're not meeting our nuclear energy investment that the IPCC has seemingly recommended or illustrated that, hey, this is a common factor in solutions. And so I take that as a recommendation. I kind of call it a prescription. Some people argue with me about that, but I think this is definitely one way to go in terms of an energy solution, but this data sort of backs me up on that.
Okay. So if we use nuclear energy more, we'll have less need of the stuff that contributes to the carbon dioxide emissions? Is it still talking about that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So right now in the United States, we still have a very large amount of coal, and we have a very quickly increasing investment in natural gas infrastructure. And those are the primary ways that we produce electricity, coal and natural gas. And the natural gas is much more efficient and much less carbon dioxide. But the coal, of course...
It's still a lot, though. I mean, it's still horrible for the environment. Yeah, it's like natural gas is kind of a PR term that the oil lobby kind of, I feel like, came up with to describe
That's right.
gas.
Yeah.
It's like organic gas. It's good, it's good for you. Like, yeah.
Is that the same thing as fossil fuels, or is that a whole separate thing?
Yeah, isn't it?
That is, don't be fooled by the marketing. It is a fossil fuel. If you want to talk about reclaimed or biogas, that would be the carbon neutral methane.
Quillclock, did you have a comment?
I'm curious, what happened there where the line changed?
Yeah.
That would be 2011
Here.
or Fukushima, and I'll definitely talk about that.
Really, it went up after Fukushima?
Sorry, you're talking about this.
So like
the
it
line-
changed here, right? It went down and then started going up again. What happened right at this point?
Okay, so that was the year that was going from 2010 to 2011, and that's when our nuclear capacity massively decreased globally.
Was that
And
from
then
treaties and stuff for people to reduce their nuclear? Was that
that
completely
is
different?
there is of course a very large correction in how we treat safety after Fukushima. Is that we had, we thought we were doing really good after we had figured out the failing of Chernobyl and the failings in 3 Mile Island. But unfortunately, there were still, we got a little complacent and there were a few mistakes made in Fukushima. And so I can speak a lot more about that a little bit later.
Okay, yeah, we have a
Set
slide
us
about
back
it.
quite a few years.
It did. It
And
did.
also, what I'm just curious, like, what about? So you're talking about nuclear energy as helping with the environment and stuff, but why nuclear as opposed to solar or wind or other types of alternative energies? Like, why is nuclear so? Why? What? Like in a hypothetical situation, why wouldn't we just solely rely on other types of renewable energy?
Well, in some ways, I can go into that in very great detail when we get towards the end. But in the basic, what you could ask is, why did the IPCC recommend it? Why do these academic studies recommend it? And the answer, I think, is that they find that the economic investment, the amount of human energy, the amount of resources we put into our energy sources is finite, and we need to have a balance between renewable energy that comes up very quickly and nuclear energy, which is available 95% of the time. So again, solar,
Efficiency?
Was it due to weather patterns? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, partly weather is why wind is not available 100% of the time. You'll get days when wind dies off completely in the United States, and I actually have a quick video near the end about that.
And then it sounds like you were saying that nuclear is most kind of efficient in terms of manpower and resources. Is that the case, or?
It is the most efficient in terms of resources. It is 1,000,000 times for pound of uranium. It's 1,000,000 times more materials efficient than a pound of coal.
So, Ghoster, I saw that you had a quick explanation point, and then Hypno after Ghoster.
Basically, he already answered the question, which was I was going to make a quick comment saying that the reason that we don't do the increase to nuclear energy was because that solar, wind, tidal powers, those are all dependent on the weather, whether it be windy, whether it be sunny, whether it be really stormy.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's so many more factors that go into
reliable.
actual production of energy, and even to the point of you could have a really windy day where you have to shut down the turbines because they'll either destroy themselves or they will oversaturate the grid with power because we can't store it.
Right.
So.
There's a special term for that, and then it's called capacity factor. That's a really good one to remember.
But
okay.
Anyway,
Hypnodog.
Interesting.
Time in the UK.
I was going to say, basically, nuclear, you can control it a little bit better, where you can say, okay, not as many people are using energy, so we'll just, go ahead and close the reactor a little bit, start producing a little bit less electricity until the demand goes up again. Whereas, solar and wind, it's inclement to the weather. Yeah.
I'd actually step back from that. As much as I'm a proponent, I could later sort of explain the difference in dispatchable and baseload energy.
And that's what Tesla also is working on, is storing that for later use, I think. But anyway, Hypno, and then I see...
He kind of covered what I was going on about. It was going to be hydroelectric, but they do all these new projects that they're coming out with. They're kind of like windmills, but with tidal currents, like ocean currents, and those are almost constant. That'd be a good idea. Yeah, so what they do is they're like upside down, like I can't really explain the shape, but you've probably seen them. Yeah, they're basically turbines that sit in the water and they float, and they're in a big line, and they're all connected to a power station on shore or a ship. And that seems like a really good way to harness the ocean, because the ocean's constant; it's not going to stop. But the problem is you have to worry about all the It's true, but you have to worry about weather for them, because they can be destroyed or damaged, and I guess the expense would be. It would probably cost less than it would to build a nuclear power plant and produce not as much, though, because power plants can produce a lot of energy.
A
lot, but they can be dangerous in times, because Chernobyl, 30,000 liquidators went in and had to fix that, and Fukushima, 10,000, 12,000.
Chernobyl was made out of duct tape and bubble gum.
Yeah, they still have a lot of those reactors in Russia.
We'll get
Like
to
they have
that, right?
5
We're
of
gonna
those
get
same.
to the
absolutely.
Okay, let's keep going real
thank
quick.
you, Hypno.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Futzy,
Futzy?
Yeah, thanks for advancing.
So I had a question. So far you've talked about fission, solar, and wind. Do you ever think nuclear fusion will be a viable energy source in the future?
Oh, we are perhaps in the right decade for that. I don't know.
What was what was you referring to?
The question is whether fusion is going to be. So we've talked about nuclear fission as the nuclear power,
What's the difference?
But fission is where it breaks apart.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so like those two, the deuterium and the tritium hydrogen isotopes, isotopes, those get mashed together, and we hope that we will be able to get more energy out of it than we put into it. Right now, we're actually using nuclear fusion to create medical isotopes. It's the most efficient way of producing a neutron source right now, but unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to break that halfway point, that efficiency of getting out more than we put into it. And I'm not really sure if we're going to get there. It always seems to be 30 years away. Let me quickly address this.
We got to get through some more slides. Just a bit, Catapult.
We've been talking about capacity factor, and this is called the duck curve. It's not just a illustration of capacity factor. The gray on the bottom is being solar. That's about a 15 to 25% capacity factor, but also the demand goes up and down. And when you subtract the solar from the demand, that's how you get the blue line, and it looks like a duck. And the more solar...
I don't see
it. Is this like the beak? Is this the beak, and this is like the tail? Okay.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Oh.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a stretch, but all right.
Sure, whatever. That's fine.
Yeah, that's right. They're looking for a clever name, and they found a name, and it kind of works. But the more solar you get, the bigger this effect is. And the bigger that ramp up, that increase in the evening, that's when everyone's going home, plugging their electric vehicles in.
That's when we need the most electricity.
And turning on the air conditioning.
Yeah, that's
all those devices.
Using powerful computers for VR chat.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Yeah, that causes gas plants to peak or rapidly increase their output, and that's a negative in our power system.
And so is this what Tesla's doing in terms of trying to help kind of address this by allowing people to store the energy for future use and things like that, or like the idea of the grid where you can give back to the grid or take from it or something?
Yeah. Theoretically, that's what's happening. The big Tesla battery in Australia, however, is only good for about 20 minutes, and their discharges of that battery, where they put electricity onto the grid, are usually much, much shorter. There's a detail, it's called frequency control, and that's when, say, your wall outlet is supposed to run at 120 hertz, and it goes too low. It drips down to like 110, 105, and then the alarm bells go off, and you got a choice. Either, this is a great one. Yeah, either you got to ratchet up a gas peaker plant to correct that frequency, or you discharge the battery onto the grid. and this is a Bonneville Power Authority. That's Washington's local PUD that controls most of our hydro, and they are in charge of balancing the frequencies on the grid, and this is sort of the task they have ahead of them to fix that every time. So maybe there's
what are
one
they
or two
balancing?
questions
What are they
it's just
Sorry,
all
what
of
are they
these
balancing
sources.
exactly?
Yes, we've got
Is
there like
wind.
are there a bunch of
wind-
sources going? Sorry, yeah, wind,
Yeah, there's
hydro,
lots.
and thermal. But like, they're all coming into. Are they all being channeled into like one, channel that you have to be deciding? I mean, like, where's the decision making happening, and what's the consequences if the decisions aren't being made? It'll just overload the grid. They have to temper some. Is it that sometimes there's too much from one source and they have to reduce it or something? Or
Yeah,
sorry, I'm not just not
exactly.
clear about that.
No,
Okay.
that's exactly right. So we have to balance the decisions for how much water we put from our reservoirs.
Oh. So
How
supply and
much-
demand.
Yeah, it is exactly supply and demand, and it's also
Okay.
all of the external constraints, like how much it costs that wind to stop running, or how much it costs the nuclear plant to shut down, or the coal plant, or the gas plant, or
Right.
the hydro rules. Like, we can't put too much water downstream, or we'll have flooding.
Yes. Okay.
Interesting.
It also seems they
Alright,
have to
Catapult.
compensate a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, we should talk about that. Catapult?
Yeah, I just
You
got two quick points. The first one, any of these scientists will entertain the theory that this climate change and all that is actually the Earth itself. Because if you go by the history of the Earth, every so many thousand, maybe even million years, it kind of purges itself. It does some really weird stuff. The weather patterns change. All hell breaks loose.
Yeah, the cycles of
And
the
it's all-
Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Milankovitch
how do we know?
cycles.
Yeah. How do we know that's not part of what's going on now?
Well, I'm sure that the details that provided in the
It
climate
is.
change episode were pretty detailed, but in short, I've got a great response, and that is, if you look at the maximum rate of change that has happened for the geologic record of the Earth, that's called the Pleistocene thermal maximum, I think, and
Sounds
Pleistocene.
correct to
Thank
me.
you. Yeah. Or PTEM. It's named for the other era that's connected to. And anyways, if you look at the amount of CO2 added to the atmosphere every year during the PTEM, it was, I think, less than 1 petagram per year. And we are currently adding something like 20 petagrams. So it's like 20 times as bad of a change as the worst point in our geologic record.
Okay. My next point was I watched a documentary once, and they mentioned that in Siberia, under the permafrost, there's so much methane stuck under that ice that if the ice ever melts, the planetary consequences would be catastrophic. Having all that raw methane
And
go up in the
diseases,
atmosphere.
too.
Right. Well, the methane is coming up right now. I'm a big fan of Gabriel Ignetti. He has a program called the Eco-Modernist Podcast, and they covered exactly this topic. So definitely check out the Eco-Modernist Podcast. The short answer is that the methane coming out of the Arctic is probably the worst of it, where it's at the actual seafloor and it bubbles up through the ocean. It doesn't come up all at once, and that's the only saving grace we have, is that there's quite a bit coming up, but it comes out in little gasps and spurts instead of just everything at once. And we don't know, maybe it will hit that tipping point someday, but it's, we've got a chance to fix our climate before we get that bad.
I think
Because the thing
That's
is,
very
methane, you'd be better off burning it than letting it go up raw, wouldn't you? It would do less harm
Exactly right.
burnt. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
so could
It's
that be a
about
source of
90
energy if you captured it?
It's very expensive. So let's move on just a little bit and get into what is nuclear waste. Now, nuclear waste is a label for things produced both from civilian energy production, military energy production, as in nuclear submarines, and in our race to produce the atomic bomb in World War II. So we've got these categories. In yellow is a low-level waste. That's like a contaminated gloves. And you can see the picture in the bottom left there. Those are oil drums that have been cut in half, showing the packing of those different kinds of low-level waste. Then there's transuranic waste. That's longer-lived actinides like plutonium, and those are those and other chemicals, of course, other elements. I mean, and those are sort of some of the more difficult fission products to get rid of. Like they stick around for a long time, and it's really kind of hard to burn them up. They don't give us the right amount of energy. And then, of course, there's high-level waste, which is mostly plutonium and spent nuclear fuel, or the mixture of uranium, the fuel that was in the reactor, 96% unused, and then the other fission products, the in-between elements like xenon and iodine and cesium, and all mixed together in that fuel pellet. And there's this black line. That black line is the boundary between where you can contact handle them because it's safe, and where you have to remotely handle them with a crane or behind water or a thick leaded glass. So if you look in the middle, the middle section, that's a high-level waste. That is in Hanford, Washington. That's a view of one of the tanks in Hanford where this PureX, or plutonium extraction facility, has sort of just dumped, because it was, the 40s and 50s, they just dumped all of their waste in these tanks and left it there. And now we have to make sure the federal government cleans it up. And on the right here, this is the inside of a reactor underwater. That blue glow, that's how you know it's working. That's called Cherenkov radiation. Let's, next slide. So when you're dealing with used nuclear fuel, this chart, the black line is sort of the total energy that is output from it. And those markings on the bottom are multiples of 10 years. So first 100, then 1,000, then 10,000, and so on years.
Wait, when you say energy that's coming out from it, is that's not energy we're capturing, that's energy that makes it harmful to us?
Yeah, what's harmful about nuclear waste? Exactly.
Well, it would. Well, there's a couple different things. There's. Let me explain first the difference between irradiation and contamination. How many? Give me a thumbs up. How many people wear contacts?
Like eye contact?
Yeah.
Okay.
So your eye contacts have been irradiated. They have been exposed to radiation. And that sterilizes, that kills everything that's in them, but they remain safe. They're not radioactive. However, contamination, that's when a particle that's emitting radiation gets out and gets uncontrolled out in the environment or in your body. And so that's the difference, is that one of those is going to, an irradiated item is not going to hurt anyone. Or maybe if it does change, if it gains a neutron, we call that activated. And so there could be activated air or activated water that contains tritium. And then there's, of course, contamination, where literally uranium or radioactive iodine escapes. And that's pretty dangerous, because that can set up in your body.
But this waste, so it's emitting radioactivity on its own. So like it's wait, right. But why can't we, if it's emitting energy, why can't we use that for energy?
Well, when you hear about these pacemakers powered by uranium or nuclear waste, or these batteries, these crystal diamond batteries made of nuclear waste, that's what that is. Unfortunately, it's very low power per weight. And so if you hold up your cell phone and you look at it, the diamond uranium battery to power that cell phone would be about 3 to 4 inches thick.
Oh, okay.
That's
And
not
it would
too
be the
bad
size-
for certain technology. I mean, like for a home, like
Oh,
you
yeah.
could imagine that we take this waste and put it. Also, I see Snowpup and Screaming Turtle. You guys both have some questions.
I actually have one question. I don't think I heard it yet because the game was lagging a bit. But I have one question. That green line, how come it's lower than the red and the black line?
Well, these are different categories. The red line is the fission products. That's the very short-lived, high-energy things like iodine and radioactive cesium, the things that really hurt us, actually. And then the actinides, that other category, is like plutonium and other transuranics.
What color
And
is
those-
actinides?
Those the green.
Okay.
And those last quite a bit longer.
Oh, okay. I see.
They're just different animals, basically.
Screaming
Screaming
Turtle?
Yeah, so I guess I just have one point I wanted to ask about is it seems like we have a lot of issues with the waste and the management of waste, and it seems like it's something that would build up over time. Do you think that in the direction we're moving as far as energy goes, do you think that we're going to move from sort of this mass infrastructure that we have as a power grid, which can have faults and have issues, and sort of move either in tandem or away from that model to have sort of an in-home power system? One of the concepts I've looked at is the idea of having an earth ship, or having a house that provides more than just your housing need, whether it's providing you energy, temperature regulation, etc.
Right.
But do you think that that becomes like maybe nuclear is a temporary solution to this long-term problem until we're able to sort of maybe be more efficient in the way we build our homes and have that play into our infrastructure as far as energy goes?
You know, honestly, I think that in the next 200 or 300 years, that is probably the right way to go, is to have many self-sufficient habitation modules that are resistant to
What modules?
habitation, like you know,
Oh,
like
habitation,
we
okay.
could literally leave the Earth in these little modules. That would be fantastic. But unfortunately, it's sort of a question of available resources and human energy and human ability to do work. I'd have to say that unfortunately, regardless of your opinion of nuclear energy, we need it in order to meet our climate goals before we hit a bad feedback loop.
I just want to say that I think that there could be a false sense of security, or this idea that we have 12 years left before we hit the bad feedback loop. I mean,
right.
These are all estimations. These are all models. No, I know you're not saying that 12 years, but I'm just saying that it's possible that we've already hit that point, and that all of this is just mitigating the damage of our future, that we're just reduce harm reduction essentially in terms of adapting these technologies. So I think it's important, because I think oftentimes it's discussed as a dichotomous, like either we're going to save the planet or we're doomed kind of thing, and it's possible that we could be kind of heading towards a pretty catastrophic future, and these kinds of things are helping to reduce the harm that's produced by it. So
that's absolutely right, and I do say 12 years, though it's not exactly the same thing. What that 12 years is, it's the number of years until 2030. and what that is the benchmark. That's the benchmark in emissions reduction, going down half of our emissions by 2030. That's the formula, the prescription. And actually, that was the first the green, gray, blue, and orange and red slide you saw from me earlier with the CO2 from the pathways.
Interesting.
And
Stranger, I noticed also, just for people who just joined, if you come to the center in that circle and then line up, that's if you have a question or something to ask. So yeah, Stranger, you can come to the center if you have a question or something.
Okay, professional geologist here. Just want to say that by 2030, we will have a 32% increase in demand in energy. So there's no it's impossible to meet any sort of climate goals, particularly for 2030. Yeah. I work in both mining and petroleum industries. It's just the demand is always increasing no matter what, particularly with the increase in population. So when it comes to energy management, we're going to be shifting away from an individual system where we have small sections powered by individual areas, and we're going to be going to much larger systems, basically where you have one energy source feeding mass populations, because it's simply just far more sustainable and far more doable.
Yeah.
And secondly, I wouldn't read into doomsday propositions very, very much. I've been hearing them for 20 years. And none of them come true. It's like the Christian guys who say the world's going to end on this day. It doesn't happen like that.
Right.
I would still be conscious about how much you pollute. That is one of the biggest issues we're facing today.
Yeah, one quick thing is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So
Absolutely.
the fact that it hasn't occurred in the past 20 years, it might be that we've discovered a trend. But anyway, yeah, that's a whole other.
I'm just saying
thing,
that if someone says a doomsday scenario, don't panic. And don't overreact right away, because you end up causing more harm if you overreact in such a short term.
In that topic, we had an episode on collapse. So if you'd like, that's available. And it's available on our YouTube channel if you want to.
And also, one last one, just aside, is that especially Stranger and some other people have mentioned your guys' own expertise, and I'd love to, like, we're always looking for more hosts or people to come on the show who have various areas of expertise of technology or anything that's related to the future. And so we'd love to have you guys on the show as well to dive deeper into your own areas of expertise.
Well, feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, we're on Discord.
I've done glacial drilling too.
If you go to endgamevr.com, we have a Discord, so you can find us there and everything. Sorry, that's a little bit
if you're not there
aside, but
okay,
let's move. Yeah, let's move through. This is what used nuclear fuel looks like. And there's a question earlier about how much waste there are. Basically, the contents of each of these is used nuclear fuel, and if you take all of that used nuclear fuel for the entire for America, rather, I was about to say the world. It's a little bit more than that for the world, but for America, it is about the size of a football field stacked 30 feet high. That's it. It's 4 kilograms of uranium that then turns into a tiny bit less of used nuclear fuel that powers an American's entire 80-year lifetime. 4 kilograms. Imagine how much trash you produce over your life. Is it less or more than 4 kilograms? Next slide.
I guess a little bit.
You produce about 5 pounds a day.
Right. So
Wait,
this
5 pounds?
is
Wow.
Roughly the average.
Depending on your
probably
lifestyle.
indirectly as well through
And indirectly.
This is sort of the consequence of that. This is called Unknown Fields Mongolia. This is where your VR headset and your cell phone are made over there in northern China, where they have the rare earth element extraction. And unfortunately, this is also the source of a lot of pollution coming from renewable energy sources. And so everything creates waste. I'd love to go into the details of how much waste and the balance, but we're really running short on time.
If you step back for a second, so that people can see, what's coming out of these pipes here?
That's the tailings of the factory. So that's the waste, basically.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
What is she doing?
That's one of the people on the documentary taking a chemical sample.
Oh, okay. That's a scientist. Okay.
Right. And so here is the materials throughput per kilowatt hour for all of our energy sources. You'll see on the left, solar photovoltaic, that's what goes on top of your roof, hydroelectricity, wind, geothermal, that might be old generation geothermal, and then nuclear energy.
Now,
and so,
can you rephrase that? What does this mean by throughput? Like how much materials we're using?
Right, how much materials... Right.
Okay.
Right,
okay.
and this is adjusted for time.
Investment and refund.
Yeah. This is adjustment for time too, as well.
Maybe it's our VR headsets, but you have fuel as orange. I don't see any orange in the graph.
Well, you'll notice there's no
bright
coal or gas or petroleum here. The fuel line, the nuclear here is the only fuel-based system, and it's there. It's less than a pixel. Because remember, per person, it's 4 kilograms.
I don't know. I could see it right. I don't know.
Yeah, our VR headsets, we have a screen door effect. We can't.
If only
right
we
there,
had
but
the
yeah.
Valve Index.
The image resolution isn't actually that great either.
In the original chart, it's not even there. It's less than a pixel.
Oh, okay.
It's so tiny.
Okay.
Interesting.
That's what he said.
So I'll talk about accidents now. So the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant has 6 reactors. 3 of those melted down.
And what's a reactor?
One of those, a reactor. That's essentially like if you play Space Chem. Each little screen is a reactor where you have inputs and outputs, and a nuclear
I don't think
reactor
any of
then
us
is.
played that.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but
Could I suggest something?
Yeah.
Combustion, yeah.
Dojo.
Yeah, Dojo.
So like, as I understand it, a reactor is basically one point that you bring enough radioactive material together to reach critical mass to generate heat, generally for turning steam turbines. So one power plant might have a number of these reactors to generate power at different sites.
Yep.
Okay.
Interesting.
And in general, each reactor is about 1 gigawatt of electricity. Some of them are less, especially if they're older. They'll might be 600 megawatt or 500 or 300. So during this accident, we had the largest earthquake that Japan had ever experienced. And that caused, of course, a tsunami, massive tsunami. And that tsunami breached the basement of Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima Daini and wiped out their backup generators. So what happened was when that earthquake hit, all of the reactors were safe. They had a mechanism to stop fissioning immediately, but unfortunately there's a couple weeks of latent energy left when they're cooling down. And so we need active power systems to keep those cool. And then there's a lot of heroic efforts, and the operators of Fukushima Daiichi and Daini saved, I think, about half of the reactors that were at risk, and half of them, the last 3 in Fukushima Daiichi, had an accident. They had a hydrogen release that resulted in the explosion that we all saw. So I'll just open it up right now for any questions on these accidents or their effects on people.
Can I talk about the Chernobyl accident a little bit? It's very similar.
Absolutely.
So when Chernobyl exploded, it shot maybe.
And what is
it
Chernobyl?
shot a lot of it. Chernobyl is a power plant in Pripyat area. In the Soviet Union, they did a test, and the test made which reactor was it? Was it reactor 1 or 3? One or 3.
They were fucking around with the reactor, and it was made of duct tape and bubble gum.
Yes, correct. It was made of garbage, and it basically caused a reaction where the reactor exploded and shot the roof off the building.
Right.
So it shot into the air. The air was literally on fire. It was literally an aurora borealis in that area, and the fire department was deployed to put out the fire. But within minutes, those men were exposed to a deadly amount of radiation and died within hours. And the amount of radiation that was shot into the sky
back to the line.
during that time was enough to cover most of the planet. So the background radiation for the planet was the only reason that anyone found out that it happened is because in Sweden there was a background radiation test, and the radiation test detected that the background radiation was almost 10 times more than it should be. And they're like, what the hell happened? And so Indian was like, oh, one of our reactors exploded. And then the whole world was like, you didn't tell us. And so a third of the planet, or maybe 2/4 of the planet, was covered in this radioactive haze. And the haze, I think it's still a problem today, where the background radiation is still in the air.
Yeah. So let me address that. There's good news and bad news. You are mostly correct. Unfortunately, the amount of nuclear weapons testing that we did in the 40s, 50s, and 60s was so much that it constitutes 90% of the contamination, the radioactive contamination that we added to the atmosphere. And
besides
about 6%
dropping of the nuclear bombs, like you're saying, just the testing.
dropping and atmospheric testing.
Dropping and testing. Okay.
Yeah, created about
Many hundreds of
90%.
warheads.
Yeah, that contamination, exactly that. And
Right,
that's how we got the polonium into the teeth and that problem. And we had a really successful environmental movement to halt atmospheric weapons testing. And so yeah, Chernobyl was a horrible accident. They didn't even have a containment dome.
No, they did not. They had to build one.
Right. Well, they're building a super isolation containment now. And the other thing about Chernobyl is that it didn't explode like an atomic weapon. It did go promptly critical. And that is a very special category of criticality that no modern reactor is capable of at this point.
It put out so much heat that the entire roof came off, and the steam container had wiggled out of the ground and shot.
Yeah. And there were about 24 firefighters who were not even told to shower off. Which
they were deployed. Their suits are so radioactive that if you go near them now, you could probably get a lethal dose of radiation.
I don't know if that's accurate. That's been a little overstated. You could actually go to the elephant's foot, the corium, the melted core of Chernobyl, and go take a selfie with it, and you would be safe.
Yeah, you can now, but during that time you could not.
Interesting.
Oh no, yeah, they dumped the equipment off in a side room, and it's still pretty hot. I think that Veritasium visited that on his YouTube show.
But are we fairly confident in saying that the safety of these things has improved since Chernobyl and since Fukushima? I assume
greatly.
Yeah, statistically, it absolutely has.
Okay.
So at this point, let me take a quick jaunt through the last section of the slides, and I would love to come back and talk to you about accidents and nuclear weapons at some future point.
We have quite a few people. Who of you had questions about waste or comments about?
Yeah, maybe let's just quickly get through. Yeah, let's just quickly get through. The comments that you guys have or questions.
Betsy?
That's my question. Okay.
Ooh, yeah, it's hard to hear you.
Can you turn up your mic a little bit?
Sorry about that.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. After the 3 Mile Island incident, the Fukushima reactor meltdowns, and Chernobyl, how much do you think public outcry from these has set back progress on nuclear energy being admitted as our main energy form?
Well, today, nuclear energy is about 20% of America's output. After 3 Mile Island, there was essentially we stopped. We stopped building new reactors. We finished about half of the projects that were ongoing, and we definitely set ourselves back quite a bit there. And then after Fukushima, it was the combination of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island that did that. And after Fukushima, we had a very large security and safety review and implemented what's called the flex response system. And so there's a means of responding to what's called a beyond design basis accident, and that was very expensive to implement. And so most of our nuclear reactors are shutting down because they're unprofitable because of this safety requirement in combination with the cheap price of fossil fuels.
Interesting.
Okay, Dojo?
I just have a couple quick points that nuclear power has a lot of bad PR for. I'm sorry if it's already been covered. One thing is that in all the nuclear power reactor disasters we've had, not one has been what people consider a nuclear explosion. It's
correct.
Often an over generation of power that leads to a steam explosion, such as Chernobyl or the SL1 research reactor. The other thing is
interesting.
Also, pretty much all of the reactor disasters I've seen have been with designs I think are from the 1950s. So even if we moved up to the state of, say, 1960s technology, there are designs like the Enhanced Breeder Reactor 2, where you can essentially turn off the cooling systems to it, and it'll get really hot for a moment, and then cool off, and then fail to react, and you'll just have to restart it later.
Yeah, I've got some slides from John Kelly of the American Nuclear Society talking about that here.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Pika?
That's basically my point. It's why I get I love nuclear energy. I grew up in the shadow of the Byron Nuclear Generating Station, and I just that's why when people point to Chernobyl as an example of why nuclear power is not a good idea, it's like, no, that was like a flawed design. It's like you pointing to a car and saying, oh, the seats are made out of razor blades, you shouldn't sit in it. There's bigger. Chernobyl pisses me off so much. I almost have to remove myself from this conversation because I'm so angered by Chernobyl.
And even then, they ran it way cooler than they knew they should have.
There's so many things.
I think we're ridiculous.
I think there needs to be more public education that why Chernobyl was flawed from the beginning, and it's not because of scary nuclear power.
And just one moment, let me give you the biggest takeaway, and that is the Imperial College of London has a tissue bank of the effects of Chernobyl. And Jerry Thomas is the expert on this, and you can go find her on YouTube, Gerry Thomas, and essentially less than 200 people have died or will ever die from the Chernobyl accident. That seems controversial, but you need to look at the actual data. And as bad as our worst accident has been,
though, I'll say it's in epidemiology, it is very difficult to determine the. I'd be curious to read that study, and I'll look at it. But it's hard to be confident in that estimate.
You have to look at the environmental conditions, the behavioral, the substance abuse in the area. And,
what accounts for death is it's variable. Yeah,
right.
But it's interesting that it's not as bad. It's overblown in the PR of nuclear power.
Yes,
I think we can agree on that.
How do we change that PR wheel to re-educate?
I think that from my perspective, talk about the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees. Talk about what it means to require drastic action for climate change, and then ask people, well, which is more dangerous, something that killed less than 500 people, or climate change and fossil fuel pollution that kills over 2 million people a year?
And other animal
species. To get to those
species.
deaths, and I think that's the key over the next 5 years. Probably we're going to see more and more deaths as a result of climate change, and then people will be more on board with these kinds of drastic.
Yeah, about 200,000 people a year die from climate change alone.
Yeah.
Hey, great one, Elf.
Great one, yeah.
Welcome back, by the way.
Oh, thank you. No, so I have a comment / question, which is in following on with my predecessors here. So, as I see it, the 21st century is like a story of success of nuclear power. Before now, before the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty on Nuclear Weapons Testing happened, we put enough radioactivity into the atmosphere that, shielding materials that were sunk at sea and other things before that are actually, coveted. It's actually a big deal, the amount of radioactivity we put in the atmosphere. As bad as Chernobyl was, it was dramatic, but most of this stuff has fallen off at this point. And Fukushima, Daiichi, and Daini, when they happened, we actually, on the left coast of the United States, ended up making new ultra-low background detectors so that we could even pick up an emission from this far away. And that was mostly radio xenons. It's the degree, if I were to draw a plot of the actual, fallout and accidental release, it would just be essentially an exponential straight down. We're almost at zero.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, our problem is not technological, it's social. And so to follow on from this, I'm not sure where the, as the actual releases that we're having, and, at some point in the late 90s, we came up with detector designs that essentially are unmeltdownable. And that's even not a well-known fact. But my question is, where is that coming from? If I say, I have this exponentially falling, incredibly small, basically zero now, very, very near zero risk. And people said, well, my tolerance is also falling on this exponential, and it's faster than that. My tolerance is actually falling to zero faster than your release. Is there something just inherent about nuclear power where we're just screwed because no one is going to believe it regardless? If I go and say it's 0.0000001, they're going to say 2 more zeros or I don't care. Essentially, is there some fate?
Other inches.
Yeah, who benefits if we don't use nuclear
Big
power?
oil.
Yeah, fossil fuels pretty much. Well, fossil fuels and
organic.
There's
fuels,
other.
yeah.
Well, maybe
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
other conspiracy theories about who's really against it or for it. But if you look at the founding of organizations like Friends of the Earth and donations to organizations like Sierra Club, you'll find that on occasion, fossil fuel interests commingle with traditional environmentalists, as they did exactly in Pennsylvania this last few months, where we're talking about providing zero emission credits to nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania, and the oil industry, the natural gas industry, and environmental traditional organizations are hand in hand in opposing it.
Huh.
Yeah. Well, money.
I know we're approaching an hour here, and we try to keep
Yeah.
it pretty short. And I know you have a lot more slides. So, are there any
let's get to what's the coolest thing in your slides that you want to get
Can
to?
you go to the? Yeah, can you go to the second video and the next 2 or 3 slides?
Okay. Well, I can get to the second video whenever. Here. So.
So this will be John Kelly of the American Nuclear Society. I recorded this in Richland, Washington, and this was about nuclear in space.
Electricity production in the U.S. We need to stop using petroleum. We need to switch coal and natural gas from direct release of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere to sequestration. And if you look at the numbers, these are my projections, not the EIA. But I look at about a 10-fold increase in renewables from where we are today. So from going from something on the order of 200 terawatts to 2,000 terawatts by 2050. So I created this little chart. It's real simple. I'm not great at graphics, but it shows on the bottom the lifetime of nuclear power plants based on their license. So the blue line is if they had a 40-year life. Well, most of the plants, about 80% of them now, have extended their lifetimes to 60 years. And so they moved to the red curve. And we now have, I think, 3 candidate sites that are looking at extending that another 20 years through subsequent license renewal, perhaps out to 80 years. This is important because it buys us time for us to then make the investment to build up there. Now, what is that mix going to look like? Well, I think advanced light water reactors, like we're building right now in Georgia, will still dominate the market. And that's probably be about 50%. But we're also looking at small modular reactors entering the market to replace coal plants that will begin retiring in the 2030 timeframe. And so that's about 25%. Then the final question is, what about generation 4? So I've saved a little space there for them, about 25%. And the point here, though, is if we're going to ever achieve that 25% for Gen 4, we need to be making the R&D investments today in order for this to come in a timely manner.
Oh,
and there's the wind.
Yeah, who is that guy?
That is John Kelly. He's the president of an organization that gifted me a membership for volunteering to record that, called the American Nuclear Society. And they are mostly professionals within the industry, within the nuclear energy, and a few in the weapons and waste management community.
Karl does that, by the way, streams various environmental meetings and presentations and such. And if you're interested, you should go check out his stuff at yestv.org.
Cool.
Okay,
So any kind of final thoughts
what
or
do you want to
anything?
finish on here?
I think that I really enjoy all of the questions you have, and I know there's a lot to get into. There's thorium and molten salt reactors are extremely exciting, but as John Kelly said, that our trajectory is downward, and so we need to be building today's reactors not only to support the workers who would work in those 4th generation technologies, but to keep alive the process and the materials and the supply chain that will make that a reality. So
cool.
Okay. I think we'd better wrap it up there. I'll go through these images real quick. And just so the others can kind of see the data, we've got it looks like
We can
some
post. Can we post these slides in the
that's a good
Discord?
idea.
So we can post
Yeah,
these
I-
on the. If you go to
Can we share
endgamevr.com,
your
we have a
link?
Discord. Deep thoughts,
Uh,
and then we can share.
Yeah,
some of
go
these.
ahead and share the link. Unfortunately, I'm sorry that I didn't put sources for some of these. Most of them come from speakers that I work with, like this one would be Scott Montgomery, Jim Conca, Reed Tanaka. This one comes from Environmental Progress, and all some very some wonderful speakers. So yeah, here's John Kelly's slides. This is called accident tolerant fuel. It's a fantastic concept where you can use existing reactors and it'll be safer. These are all the small modular reactors that are so small that they can't have a steam explosion. And the next slide is, these are those fantastic 4th generation reactors you all, or at least half of you know about, I'm sure. There's
I'm
not just
also
the molten
impressed.
salt reactor.
I'm impressed at how many people here have in-depth knowledge of nuclear power and technology.
Yeah,
I've been like,
informed, you
holy
guys.
shit, this is
Yeah, good
this
job.
is it's pretty
You
impressive.
should
Yeah.
get some
Oh,
education
no.
on that.
Yeah.
And then
NASA was visiting. They have NASA and Aerojet Rocketdyne, and I found these models that NASA had and took a nice picture of that. And this is called the Fast Flux Test, the test vessel, or FFTF. I forget the last F, but yeah, this is a test vehicle that they use to test thermal nuclear engines and reactions for space.
Okay. Well, that's our last slide. So
I do.
thank you.
Do you want to choose one to have in the background when we take a picture? Oh, yeah, be good.
All right, this is more of a humorous question. However, is the Thanos avatar intentional for this talk?
Absolutely. You have a choice.
Yes.
You can either stop using energy, or use more nuclear.
Or snap and everyone disappears?
Well, everyone could disappear.
Half of us would, Petey. Oh yeah.
It's interesting. I kind of agree. I usually don't agree with them, but I kind of agree with. I think it was Wendover Productions did a great video on that. It's a little strange. That nuclear-powered aircraft is maybe if we're on a different planet, they would be much better.
Well, thank you, Karl, for all the great information.
Yeah, thank you. This has
really
been great, and thanks for all the
appreciate it.
questions and thoughts.
And
we'll turn off security so we can get a final group picture. And
All right.
if you guys we can continue this
Everyone
discussion.
come up for picture.
I think the one. I think Byron Nuclear Generation Station was Carl.
That's pretty great.
I think it was the side.
All right, make sure you can see Ghoster's camera. Oh, what should we say?
Energy! Because it ends on E and everyone's going E, like smile with the
go.
5 E's.
Perfect.
Energy!
Energy on.
Energy!
Yes. Energy! You're running out of room behind me.
I think we're good.
Yay!
Okay.
Somebody wants to.
How did my frame rates go to shit at the very end?
I don't know.
Interesting.
Voices are expensive.
Everybody
Voices are
piling in.
expensive.
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
That's true.
Maybe that's true. Like more people are talking. Exactly.
Yep.
I enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. I had a lot of good questions
Yeah.
about that because it really kind of played into my interests.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. That was cool. I didn't realize people had expertise in this area, so it was very interesting.
to learn a lot of
You know,
stuff.
didn't
And
get
that,
everything,
yeah,
but we got to a lot
That's
of
okay.
it, so-
Yeah, he's up
You don't have any 4th of July?
It was a
Oh, wait,
great
that's American.
presentation regardless.
Yeah, thank you,
Yeah, it was
Atomic.
really great, man.
Stop! Oh my god. That's fucking terrifying.